everyone for coming today and joining us. And for those that are joining us for the first time, I'm Saeed Al Madani. I'm an artist based in Abu Dhabi. And this is our seventh talk of the series. And today we have a group edition and a few more will be coming up in the later weeks. And today we have 4 artists, including myself, Majd Alloush, Saeed Al Madani, and Sofiane Si Merabet, also known as the Confused Arab on Instagram. And we started working together towards the UaeUnlimited exhibition Intima, which opened earlier this year in February. But we started working together last summer, and I wanted to bring forth this group that I had a really good time working with. They're such dynamic artists and in different stages of their careers, and I thought it would be a great discussion to bring all of you attending today. I would also like to thank UaeUnlimited for bringing us together on this project, from our curator, Nasser Abdullah, to the NYUAD Art Gallery team, and all the partners, and each and every individual that helped us with this exhibition. And to our mentors from the Stellar Program, Dana Awartani, and the 4 poets who exhibited alongside us. And while the talk is about identity today, it's also about the pieces and the parts and the fragments. And we'll be focusing on our commission pieces, but we're also going to be speaking about a few other significant works in our practice that helped guide and push us towards our commissioned work for the show. And following that, we'll be answering a few questions from the audience, so feel free to use the chat box to comment or ask questions, whether it's to a specific artist or if it's a theme or question you'd like all of us to answer. And so to start us off, we have Majd Alloush, who is a Syrian artist based in the UAE. He graduated from the University of Sharjah in 2018 with a fine arts degree. A lot of his practice revolves around documentation and how he adapts this approach towards the explored subject in his work, such as politics and psychology, just to name a few. And he's going to give you a better introduction than that. So without further ado, take it away, Majd.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for having us here, and thanks for everyone who's attending this talk. It's overwhelming to see the amount of people that are in this session and so many just familiar names. So I'll start talking a little bit about the background and my interest in art and how it started. So when I graduated from high school, I just knew that I wanted to do anything that is related to engineering. So I went and I signed up for electrical engineering in University of Sharjah, but I did not even take the replacement test. I changed my mind quickly and I withdrew all my papers and I went to College of Fine Arts and Design and I booked a seat there and I signed up as a graphic design major at the start. So as in my foundation year, I remember myself walking around college and seeing all these different rooms and different facilities without having any idea on what it's used for. And I would do this every day where I would just take walks and enter different rooms, and I just stumbled across the filmmaking studio. And I remember I just froze and I just fell in love with the smell of the studio, the smell of the chemicals, the people who are inside working, how they're getting their hands dirty, the facilities, the tools. So I started visiting this place often, and as a foundation student, we were not really allowed to be inside a lot. So I would sneak in after hours, after 5, and I would sort of just sit and watch people work and how they're working without having any idea what's happening. And I would sometimes steal scrap copper pieces, scrap prints. I have this piece that I stole actually a long time ago that I still have it until now. This is it. And, I would just collect all these things and keep them in my car, in my room. I just enjoyed looking at it, touching it without having any idea what it is. And one day I got caught by the filmmaking professor. His name is Tom Bagley. And we had a long talk about what fine arts is and what filmmaking is. And everything just became so clear in my head. And I just knew for a fact that this is what I'm interested in and this is what I wanted to do. So I just rushed to the main building. I just changed my major and I said that I want to study fine arts. I was not sure if I was going to make it. I thought it would be very stupid to do that quick. But I did it anyways because I was just willing to do the work and explore and learn a lot about this major. So during second year, we were introduced to different methods of art. So we were introduced to painting, sculpture, photography, and printmaking. But what interested me the most is the printmaking. I started focusing a lot about printmaking, and at first I knew that printmaking is just all about etching and using the copper plates to like make prints. And that's it for me. That's what it was for me, and that's what I know. But later on, I got introduced to like different techniques and different materials, such as screen printing, lithography, linoleum, woodblock, etc., etc. And I just knew that this field is just never ending. You could go on and like learn a lot about it without it stopping. So during my senior year, after a year and a half, I found myself being interested in the copper as the artwork, because in traditional filmmaking, usually it's the print that is the important part of the work. But for me, it was a little bit different, where I started focusing on the copper itself. I'll just share my screen. 1 second. Why can't I share my screen, Sarah?
I allowed you to share the screen. Is it not working?
Let me see. No. Hold on. Okay, maybe it should work now. Okay, yes. Is this clear?
Yeah, it's clear.
So I started working a lot with copper and using copper as the main element of my work. So I did, during my senior year, I did a lot of copper work, as you can see in the slide. I started using copper. I spent my senior year basically researching and dealing with copper a lot, looking how it reacts to different materials. So I melted copper. I poured resin over copper. I did a lot of photo etching. I played with the amount of time that I kept the copper inside the acid to see how much it could like eat away, and the outcome were basically like it just never ends. You could do so much with copper, and that's what like fascinated me about it. So after I graduated, a year after maybe, I continued making work, but not really like with copper, because you know when you graduate you lose like the facilities that you have, such as the printmaking studio, so you can't really like make the same work. But then later on, I started adapting and I started using copper as like the main element. But like later on, I received a phone call from Nasser Abdullah, and he told me he just asked me to be a part of this exhibition that's happening with UaeUnlimited, and I just said yes. A part of me started thinking about like I started missing like having deadlines and having like mentors telling me that you should do this and you should finish this in this like specific timing. So I just said yes, and while later the theme came up and it was about identity, and I just froze. I did not know what identity meant to me, and I didn't know what to do about it. So I started researching, and I just scratched the surface a little bit on what identity means. And to me, the first thing that came to my head was flexibility and change. And as a Syrian artist, and I'm sure many other nationalities suffer from this, it's very hard to move around and travel because your passport prevents you from doing that. So I started linking my identity with this, because when I graduated, I found myself, you know, wanting to attend exhibitions outside. I wanted to go travel outside, get my master's done, live outside for a while, but I could not really do that. It was pretty hard. It was a setback for me. So I decided to, again, use copper as the main element in the work, because copper reflected a little bit about the features of copper reflected about my identity and what it means. And as you know, like copper is a highly reactive material. It reacts to like the environment that you put it at, the atmosphere, and it's just like in a constant state of change. And that's what identity means to me. allowing yourself to change, allowing yourself to experience things, and just like doing whatever you want to grow and learn. So I made 10 copper plates, 10 small copper plates, and I thought that, hey, since I can't travel and since I can't leave easily to specific countries, I might as well like send some sort of like extensions of myself outside to live in these places that I can visit and see how it goes. And at the start, the main thought in my head was like, it's going to be a hassle when it comes to like communication with these individuals that I chose. But it was worth giving it a try. So I contacted, with the help of my friend, I contacted some people, and I was surprised to see the responses that I got. Everyone was just super happy to participate in the exhibition, in this project, and I received a lot of feedback. So I just went on and did it. I sent 10 copper sheets to 10 different countries, and the countries are the USA, Canada, Mexico, Colombia, Australia, Germany, Switzerland, Japan, Spain, and the UK. Those countries that I chose chose them based on my own experience, some of my family members, and some of the people that I know in my life. And so I made a package that basically included the copper plates with a smaller piece and a letter that basically tells each individual what they should do with it. And it was very straightforward. I just told them that keep this with you, do whatever you want with it, feel free to like do anything with it as long as I can just get it back in one piece. And I also asked them to send me some processed images. And I knew for a fact that once I received the plates back, each plate would be very unique and will have a different texture to it according to like how each individual will like interact with it. So it was basically like a conversation between like my identity and theirs. They will have their identity imbued on the plate itself, which is my identity. And these are some of the photos that I received from the artist, from the individual. So as you can see, some just like gave it to their pets, some just used it every day, different things. And some people boiled it, some people used it to stamp objects, some people traveled with it, some people even showered with it. It just made me very happy. It filled my heart to see all these like images. It was pretty nice. And so once I received them back, I'll start talking a little bit about the text that's on the plate. And basically the text is, you can't really read what it is. The text basically means that, you know, when you go to an embassy and apply for a visa, whether it's like a visiting visa or a student visa, whatever it is, you would receive a letter later on that tells you basically whether you're like accepted or like your visa is rejected. So one problem that I suffered from the most is that I would always constantly receive the same letter. So I started collecting the letters that I have and that some of my friends sent me also their letters and some of my family members, and I used the idea of like skimming and scanning, because once you receive the letter over and over, the same letter over and over, you become numb to the content. You just like start pinpointing the code words to like know what it means. And I chose specific lines in each letter and I etched them onto the plate, and that's what the text was all about. And on the right, it's a thumb print, and that is what's used in embassies to like identify yourself. And this is like, the thumbprint is basically each individual's identity on a separate plate, as you can see here. And these are some of the exhibition photos. And that's it.
Thank you, Majd. Also, the detail on this work is so subtle and beautiful. If you ever get to see it in person, I'd recommend that. And moving on, we have Saeed. Saeed Al Madani is an Emirati artist based in Dubai and has an MA degree in printmaking from the Royal College of Art in London. He also was a part of SEEF's first cohort and was a resident in the 2019 edition of Sharjah Art Foundation's March project. His practice draws on elements of conceptual, minimalist, scientific, and abstract strategies where he explores the relationship between language and space. Through his work, he also questions how objects and performance combined allow for the construction of identity, obsession, and a sense of place. So Saeed, if you'd like to share your screen. I hope you guys were able to hear that over the adhan. Okay. Saeed, you're on mute.
Well, you can hear me. I'm going to share my screen now. There, can you see it? Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Saeed Al Madani.
Can you just make it a little bit larger on the screen because we can, there's a lot of space.
Okay. There you go. I forgot about that. Okay. Again, I'll start over. Good evening, everyone. Saeed Al Madani here. I'll start my talk with a text and then take you through a few pieces of my work to describe the main ideas that I'm interested in today.
إن الإنسان يخضع في حياته الاجتماعية لتنويم يشبه من بعض الوجوه التنويم المغناطيسي، وهو ما يمكن أن نسميه بالتنويم الاجتماعي. فالمجتمع يسلط على الإنسان منذ طفولته الباكرة إيحاء مكررا في مختلف شؤون العقائد والقيم والاعتبارات الاجتماعية، وهو بذلك يضع تفكير الإنسان في قوالب معينة يصعب الخروج منها. وهذا هو الذي جعل الإنسان الذي نشأ في بيئة معينة ينطبع تفكيره غالبا بما في تلك البيئة من عقائد دينية وميول سياسية واتجاهات عاطفية وما أشبه، فهو يظن أنه اتخذ تلك العقائد والميول بإرادته واختياره، ولا يدري أنه في الحقيقة صنيعة بيئته الاجتماعية. ولو أنه نشأ في بيئة أخرى لكان تفكيره على نمط آخر.
So some of the key questions driving my practice includes this one: is the self made in the image of place? And also, what if identity was an image of everything that is out of focus? And really, for me, an identity that is out of focus is one that overlooks proximity, where everything or anything that is close is subject to fading than focus. I spent a couple of years in London a few years ago. The distance made me want to cling on things that were familiar and understand my surroundings, where I am, and also my place in the world. But I also asked the question about, what is home? Because you're longing for it, for that feeling. And how do you create it in other parts of the world? Thinking really about, fundamental questions about existence and purpose. This made me refocus my attention to spaces, and not the interstellar or intergalactic kind of space, but those that are more immediate, like my apartment in London, my room, and the objects around me. So then my practice became a question about spaces, about finding meaning. How does space transform into place? And through my research, I understood it was through ascribing value to relationships, to people, to thoughts, and objects. And through my research also, I found that space plus meaning equals place. This is where my conclusion, or this was my conclusion through using this conceptual / mathematical formulaic approach that is overarched by language. So in doing that, I kind of wanted to explore the Arabic language as a way of finding meaning in London, because it was the most familiar and the most potent material that kept emerging in my head. But I decided that instead of using actual letters and words, that I could instead focus on diacritics, the tashkil and the ajam. These are the marks and signs that you add to Arabic words that allow legibility. So I created this work. These diacritics themselves are inherently transformative, and that in changing one mark, you could change the meaning of it. So I wanted to use this idea of its transformative potential as a way of transforming the space that I was in into a place of meaning. Like my apartment, for example, how can it feel homey? How can you feel at home? And this work is where the materialization started. But those who don't read Arabic ask me, what does it say? What letter is this? And what does it do? But the work itself is not literature, it is art. And I wanted something more abstract, moving on from that. So I moved on to the dot or the nuqta and created this installation. It's called Blueprint. When I install these objects, and these objects have meaning to me, and rearrange them, and even if I took the same installation and I install them elsewhere, it becomes a place. It becomes a place of meaning, a blueprint of a place that can become home. And for me, as Gaston Bachelard said in his book, The Poetics of Space, a home is where one can dream in peace. A home is where the daydreamer is sheltered. And that is where, that's basically what home is to me as well. And I was given a corner during my degree show in London, and I wanted to take advantage of the corner. And I wanted to treat it as a place of refuge, as a border, as a barrier of some sort. And I wanted the installation for people, when they approach it, to disrupt it with their own interpretation. As each individual, they're unique, and they come in with their own culture and their own history, and they make from it what they will. Which brings me to this next body of work. I was exploring Sharjah, specifically the Maleha archaeological sites. I encountered the scene and was intrigued and started to think about time, domesticity, and even the built environment, but specifically asking questions about how much of our histories are real or imagined, and not just thinking about progress, development, or growth, but also the uncertainty of the future and the potential downfall of civilizations. We hear of different civilizations that once existed and today they don't. So progress is not always a good thing. And going deep into the process of thinking about places, I kind of wanted to create my own iteration of an imagined and transformative place. So what I did was I produced over 1,000 units made of clay and created a series of work that I titled An Iteration, because the intention was to create several iterations using the same objects over the period of the exhibition. And here's a sketch of it. I installed the work the first time and then visited the space over the 3-month period to add more objects, or to take away some objects, or to move them around, as a way of kind of reflecting this idea of a changing landscape over time, be it good, bad, or ugly. And this body of work was part of the 2019 March Project residency by the Sharjah Art Foundation. I'm just gonna, and this is also another installation outside of that smaller space, kind of mimicking that same idea. And I call, this kind of body of work place mimicry. Moving on to the final body of work that we all have taken part in, I was part of the UaeUnlimited exhibition this year called Intima Belonging, curated by Nasser Abdullah. The idea of the show was to reflect on identity, and I felt like this worked really well with my practice and thinking about how places and environments not only affect and shape identity, but also how they infect them. And my focus was on the idea of external factors constructing and molding identity, but more specifically, that growth, whether personal growth or urban development, has a dark side to it that may be overlooked. Because growth also results in loss of culture, loss of identity, loss of meaning even, old architecture being taken down, and so on and so forth. So, and through this process of thinking, I wanted to bring time, technology, and even economics by reflecting on my geographical location being in the UAE. So the title of the work, or of the installation, is Lull, which translates to Hudu Mu'aqqat. It is a temporary interval of quiet or lack of activity. And I wanted to play with that same idea of lull before the storm, because we are always in anticipation of something that is about to happen, in anticipation of something that is about to change. And I wanted to bring that and introduce it into the work. Here are a couple of images that I referenced. And so with that work, I used the form of the desert truffle and 3D printed it. The desert truffle, the fagar, is the most valuable or expensive mushroom in the region. It illustrates this growth trajectory of the region. So I wanted to use it for relevance. And each truffle is irregularly shaped and grows in multiples only after a thunderstorm. It is intended to symbolize the birth of riches, life in unexpected places like the middle of the desert. But I also consider the truffle as a self-portrait, constructed 1 millimeter at a time. And as most of you know, Dubai is home to the largest 3D printed building in the world. So using this 3D printing material for me was important and was relevant as well. And these objects here, they move, they repel, and they attract using magnets driven by 5 magnetic fields under each truffle that have been coded as a representation of external factors that are unpredictable, uncontrollable, that have so much impact in shaping us today. So this idea of places shaping us, this idea of taking from an environment and creating an installation as a way to mimic that same environment is the key topic of my research, which is place mimicry. As you can see here, the objects move, and I can't really, or they're not really controllable. They're coded, so they move, they interact with one another, and create this kind of interesting space of external factors influencing identity. And that's pretty much it. That's me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Saeed. Next, we have Sofiane. And Sofiane Si Merabet is a French-Algerian artist and cultural entrepreneur based in Dubai. Sofiane's primary interest is in plural identities as represented through his digital platform, The Confused Arab, on Instagram. He explores the future of nostalgia in parallel to an ongoing questioning around themes such as memories, identities, and diaspora. So, Sofiane, if you'd like to share your screen.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, I'm going just to share it now. Yeah, so good evening, all of you. First of all, thanks a lot, Sarah, for having us tonight. So I'm going to take you through different parts. The first part will be kind of defining how I perceive identity or identities as dynamic items, or dynamic elements, I would say. The second part will be sharing with you how in my previous works I've mixed or I've worked on identities through my art. And the third part will kind of explaining you the video performance I shared with all of you during the exhibition, Intima exhibition. Sorry. Yes, so as I was telling you, identity is something very central for me. It's something which does inspire me since a long time. It does inspire me as being the center of social interactions and perceiving also identities as dynamic elements. So what do I mean by dynamic elements? Is that we don't have just one identity, we have identities. So let's say for my case, I'm an expatriate in Dubai. I'm a French Arab, I'm French, I'm Algerian, I'm Arab and Amazigh, I'm Muslim, I'm a man, and I'm a human being. So I mean, all that different elements, all that different levels, or let's say parts of my identities come with privilege, but also with also, let's say, some fragilities. And that's what I really wanted to think about when I define identities. So by seeing identity as moving elements, your identities are more or less defined compared to something. And this something can be you, but it can be also something bigger, which is the society. And the society being a social construction, comes with, let's say, benefits, but also with discriminations for some of us. So when you're part of a society, sorry, can you hear me? Yeah. The society has, let's say, an inclusive phase, but it has also exclusive, or let's say discriminating phase or part of it. So who is in the society quite often? Let's say it's the majority. Should it be like an ethnicity, religion, some values, an economic status? Who's out? The others, the ethnic minorities, the religious minorities, the sexual minorities, or let's say the underdog. So by defining the society as this social construction, the society is built on national myths. It comes with national identity, and as I like also just to refer to the French part of me with the vivre ensemble, which is the living together. So I mean, I wanted first of all just to define, or just to take all of you through this kind of mind, let's say, thought process, just to better understand my work and some of the questioning that I have or I might have before. So identities and art. I will take you now through some of the works that I've shared or exhibited before. So one of the first work that I've developed was Hammam Tomorrow. It was an installation in Sika Art Fair in 2017, and it was actually a very interesting experience where I was, let's say, both artist and curator. I had the idea of revive the memory of my grandmother Hammam in Algeria, and I invited some artists just to share with them, just to share with me, let's say, their memories, and how, let's say, identity was both something physical, but at the same time something like memorial, like linked to times. The second work I wanted to share with you also was Hawa City. Hawa City was also part of Sika Art Fair, and it was also an immersive installation, because I mean the majority of the first work that I did were immersive installation. So in Hawa City, I was taking the visitors to again a place, because I think that if you want to speak about identities as being something, let's say, dynamic, you also want people to be actors. So I wanted people just to move, just to be experimenting like different kind of feelings. In this one, I took airports. I took an airport, a suspended airport, just to show how very often being an Arab these days can be an interesting through a complicated experience, especially in airports. So I mean, clearly here I was making reference to the September 11th, 2001 aftermath, and let's say all the consequences of the bad image, or let's say the violent image which was associated to our people. I also wanted to show that the same person can have, for sure, different identities, but that the way we were holding different passports, and in this sense, it's quite close to what Majd was referring to at the beginning. The perception of people would definitely change depending on the passport that you were holding. I also, in this installation, in the second part, I also wanted to show how airports were an emotionally charged place, not just for Arabs, but let's say I wanted just to focus on Arabs, or let's say on migrants in general, because airports are places where we leave our beloved, or where we leave our past life. Or I mean, there's always, like, let's say, a strong emotional relationship with airports. This last and third installation that I wanted to share with you, which was quite different from the previous one, was a Scanner's caption. So I mean, it's let's say it's a pen between like introspection and scanner. And here, clearly, what I wanted to show was, again, the fact that identities are something moving, that's something which is not, let's say, fixed. But I also wanted to criticize the fact that very often identities are subject to judgment. I mean, people will quite often, instead of asking or just like to discuss to know better, they will more often use the privilege as a tool of judgment. And here, like in the previous installation, you can see that the scanner is not just a tool for judgment or curiosity, but sometimes also for humiliation. Now I'm taking you to the piece that gathered all of us, which is called "My Parents Have Never Been to the Ice Rink." I'm going to take you quickly through my thought process during the realization of this piece. But I also wanted very quickly just to thank all of you, Sarah, Saeed, and Majd, and also all the Nasser, for sure, Shoba and UaeUnlimited, for allowing me also just to challenge myself and go beyond what I was used to do. As you could see, very often I was used to do, like, let's say, immersive installations, things which are, let's say, more colorful and quite closer to pop art. I wanted to take the opportunity with UaeUnlimited and with Intima just to do something completely different, even though if the thematic was similar to the previous one. So we're still in the thematic of the society and the in and the out. So I was quite inspired by mosques, actually. Mosques as being a place where people are all together, but also mosque as a place where when you pass in front of it, if you're not inside it, you don't see exactly what's happening. I've started just to research a lot on the symbolics of arches in the Islamic architecture. And initially, the project was not to work on, let's say, an ice rink, but it was more just to work around the thematic of mosque more directly. Then something which also really, really like intrigued me always in mosque was seeing all these shoes and let's say all this part of ourselves that we are living before entering into the mosque. I mean, it's basically done out of respect and out of religiosity, but it's also a part of ourselves that we are living. And I've always been asking myself to who these shoes might belong. All this work led me also to the definition of cultural capital, because by entering mosques, I always wanted to know exactly whose shoes belong to who, and basically in a mosque where we're meant to be all equal, what is the difference? So I mean, I took then after the thematic very far away, and I took back to France and to my personal history, or the history of a lot of people being sons of migrants, and I used the thematic of cultural capital. So Pierre Bourdieu, French sociologist, defines the cultural capital as the accumulation of knowledge, behaviors, and skills that a person inherits from its family or social environment, and that can demonstrate one's cultural competence and social status. The cultural capital is based on a habitus, a series of both physical and mental habits, and schemes of perception as posture, accent, appreciation, and also taste, all influenced by our social backgrounds. This is an element also just of which was part of the research, which is if you see, you have on the top the capital in volume, so economic capital in volume. Down you have the capital, sorry, the cultural capital and the economic capital. So I mean, Pierre Bourdieu worked on this mapping, showing a different kind of associating different kinds of activities, might be sport, might be cultural activities, to the social codes or social situation of people. Very quickly, I thought of ice skating, because ice skating was something, I'm myself the son of Algerian parents, which were in Algeria in a very good position. But when they came in France, even though they studied, and even though they have, like, let's say, cultural background, they had to face something completely different. And I think that ice skating was, even though if ice skating is not something very common in France, but it was, let's say, something which was kind of segregating, because I could see that my parents have never been to the ice rink. And that really inspired me for this installation, in which I'm showing, let's say, a metaphor of integration of people coming. And I'm going to share with you, sorry, just the video performance by. Sorry, just 1 minute.
Sofiane, do you want to escape? Like just
I think that we might be good now, no? I mean, but now I don't know if now you can see. Can you see it now or not? No?
It's still on the PowerPoint.
Okay, yes, so maybe can I escape, please?
You can also unshare if you want, then share it again.
Sorry. I think now.
Okay, yeah, this took a while.
So basically, through this video performance, as I told you, which is very different from what I was used to do, you can see three different steps, three different parts. The first
you, but the video is a bit too loud for when we're trying to hear you as well. So if you want to mute it, or just put the volume down a little.
Yeah. Is it okay now?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I meant that, yeah, there were 3 steps in this video. The first one, as you can see, where I'm wearing a traditional jalaba, like Algerian garment, where I was following and showing the fragility of people leaving their countries and settling up in a new one. And then after, you can see also another kind of fragility when I'm wearing other dresses, like another dress, another clothes, and where I'm basically assimilating, even though I don't like this word, trying to be another one, putting other shoes, but progressively finding my way. The reference to the carpet is a reference to traditions, or let's say also to some extent to religion, and to something you will always come back to in case of, let's say, bigger problem. It does also, it's also clearly also reference to the fact that you're not just one, you're several, and that life is more about how you can get closer to the deep self that you are. I'm going to stop sharing. And here we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Sofiane. So I'm gonna introduce myself. You probably just know me as an artist, but just a little bit of a background. I graduated last year from NYU Abu Dhabi with a degree in art and art history, specifically the visual arts track. And in my work, I like to explore this idea of in-betweenness. And whether it's between mediums, whether it's between text and image, or poetry, fiction, and reality, these are just some of these explorations that I explore in my work. And just to give you some visuals to that, I'm going to share my screen. Can everyone see my screen? Okay, cool. So just a little bit of a background into my practice. I write simultaneously when I am creating my work. And I want to share this piece of writing with you because it includes a lot of terms that are going to come up within the presentation and a lot of terms that are used within my work. A string, a long string with end no end. System, which is thought, which are memories. Memories in the physical, not linear, not a bundle. Inside lies a collection. So here's an installation.
We can't hear you properly.
I'm so sorry. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, but your video is lagging, but I can hear you.
Okay, well, let's just stop me if it happens again.
No, I can't.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. So I'm gonna start from the current slide. So here's an installation view of my work building blocks. It's from the first series and the second series in which I use wood scraps to create these structures. And for me, with these works specifically, it's all about deconstructing and reconstructing, deassembling, reassembling, and what forms can I actually achieve with these parts that were given to me. And for a closer look, so in a lot of my work as well, I like to use natural colors and this idea between the natural colors of the material versus synthetic colors, and I create a system within that. And to break that system, I like to use these lines of fluorescent orange or fluorescent red to break that system and to break the viewer's gaze. And here's another close-up shot of another work. This is another series that was part of my show in Carbon 12 called Between, and this series specifically is called Sectionalized Structures. And I used one archive image of coal miners in Tennessee, where my grandmother is from, and I wanted to find myself within that. And I find myself also trying to put myself in environments and settings and these fictionalized places because I've never truly lived during that time. I've never truly been there. And I find myself within the details, within the structure, within the pattern of the piece. And just for context, the medium is inkjet on vellum mounted on bookboard. Here's another work. It's actually more recent. I'm part of the CEIF fellowship currently, and so one of my experimentations was about color, because I noticed within my work that I tend to gravitate towards these colors, but I wanted to push it and understand more as to why I do so. So I collected these paint chips that are mass-produced, can be found anywhere in the world, all the same, and I wanted to put my twist on it and physically my mark. So I scratched out the name that was given to it by whoever, and I started to write with my own handwriting what that color would possibly mean to me. And I used my writings again, and my writings were about memories, were about just subtle notes about every day. And also they were quite intuitive. I would look at a color, I would immediately write what I thought. And then if it took a bit longer, then I would go back to my writings and try to find this connection between the two. So for example, over here, if you can see my cursor, instead of cottage white, I wrote note paper. Down here, instead of woven jute, I wrote, I know how the color beige looks to me. Around here, I wrote scratched up dialect. So they're all quite, they're quite personal in a sense and directly related to me. And to present them, I wanted to put them in this handmade book type thing. I'm still really unsure about it, but it's a constant exploration. And I liked how they came together as a collection, yet they individually were presented alone in the same sense. So like over here, there's scans, but here they're all together. So this idea between individualness and collection. And now I'm going to take you towards the commissioned work for UaeUnlimited's Intimaa. So when I was first approached with this opportunity, and knowing that the theme is identity, kind of like Majd, I was really stuck because a lot of my work is about that, but I don't put that at the forefront. So I was trying to find ways in which I can explore it in a different perspective. And so I went back to the root word of identity, and it comes from idem, which means the same. And that really struck me because, in my opinion, in a world today when we're all trying to be different and unique, what does identity mean when we're trying to be the same? And here's also another piece of writing that was part of my research. It says identity from idem, the same, accumulation of sameness becoming oneness, wholeness. And while I will take you to the end result of the piece, I wanted to focus on the process because the process was very rigorous. I changed my mind at least 10 times before actually settling on the last piece. And so my first instinct when hearing identity after looking at the root word was to create these vessels. And I looked at identity as a body, identity as a vessel through vases and bowls, and what did that mean? And I wanted to create it out of clay or wood, and wood again being a material that I'm very familiar with, how could I push it? And I would also have these writings from my research, which I just showed previously, onto these bowls, but it didn't seem like it was enough. I needed to push it further. On the left is how I would have ideally presented it, and had enough space between these different individual forms, but they all collectively were the same material, and it allowed for conversation between the two. And then on the right side, I wanted to possibly work with just raw wood, and what would that mean? But again, something was missing. So I stumbled upon mold making within the fellowship, and I absolutely fell in love with it. The detail that you can get with these objects that you start to cast. And I was specifically interested in rocks because you can learn how old they are. They kind of have a lifetime of their own just by finding a fossil within it. You can have like an average age of the rock, and that was really fascinating to me. And so I experimented with different materials, including plaster with dried leaves, wax, sand, glue, resin on the right, and just like plain old wax. And I was trying to find this perfect recipe on how to create this rock that would very similarly look like a rock as well. So this was the end result. And then I'm gonna go further into it. Something that was also really important to me was how these objects would be displayed. And I dwelled a lot in this idea of collective versus individual. So here you can see, or at least to me, this wooden treasure box symbolized almost like a natural history museum feel to it, in which I can categorize and systemize these rocks, but in the sense that it was still individual. You could close it, it could be yours, you could travel with it. And that really interested me. But then I also went to these plastic containers, almost like as if the rocks were specimens, but again, it didn't really speak to me. It was more about the individualized rock and these individualized objects, and I wanted them to have a system of their own. So I researched more into this uniform, unit-like natural history museum display, and it seemed like there was this repetitive system that kept coming up, and I was really interested in replicating that. And I did. I replicated it during install, and I just sat there and I was like, this looks like, it doesn't look like me. It doesn't look like it's saying enough. It doesn't look like it's saying what I want it to. And so I started to break the system. I started to have some on pedestals. I started to have some that were joined, as you can see here, and some that weren't joined, and some that were left alone, like on the corner of the table. And it's not that clear, but also I had written certain lines on the table as well. I'll read a few out. It reads, "Truth and fiction taking turns, one imitating the other. Through much of these explorations, you may well be the only person inside the museum. The distances between my body and the remnants I leave behind, limited by walls. What do you remember about the earth? And what were they? Evidence." And those were just some sentences that I had written on there. And these objects had my DNA on them. So through identity, I saw it as a perspective, like a biological and fictionalized archaeological perspective, again, between truth and fiction. And this is a wider shot of the installation. And also I wanted to speak about this idea of value and meaning and how we form meaning. And I didn't want to give the viewer everything. I wanted the viewer to make their own connections as well, and not necessarily figure out the system, but to approach it in their own way. And these are close-up shots of the work. So this is an everyday pill that I take. This is lint from my clothes in the washing machine. And this is my makeup. And this is a cotton ball. And there were others that had parts of my ID, parts of my clothes, a Band-Aid, just to name a few. And I'm gonna leave you with a quote that has sat with me for a while in my practice. It says, "The viewing and understanding of an object can be described as layers or layered. We peel away the layers from an object ultimately to come to its core and its full meaning." And I kind of disagree with it now. I think for me, at least with my practice, the more layers that I put on my work, the more full and whole it becomes, and the more meaning it gives to me. So that's what I'm gonna leave you with. Thank you. All right, so we have we have a question. I know it's 8 already, so if anyone has to leave, don't worry. And I think we're gonna stay for about 20-30 minutes if everyone is good with that, and we'll just answer questions and have a dialogue, see where it goes. And so the first question is from Najum Al-Ghanem. She asks, what are the challenges Intimaa had exposed you to and how did you overcome them? Majd sort of answered, but I would love to hear from the rest of you, including you, Sarah. Okay. Cool. Majd, you slightly spoke about that, but if you want to maybe elaborate a little more, and then we'll go to Saeed and Sofiane and then me again.
Sure. So to me, there were a lot of new things in this commissioned work. I've never participated in a commissioned work before. That was my first one, and it included a lot of things, such as, you know, writing a concept, writing a professional statement, writing a budget proposal, and it's just different when it's like related to like you know, having pressure on you when it comes to like, you know, you have a budget and you need to do the work and you need to like do it in this specific time and you need to finish. You have a deadline for it, and that was a little bit hard for me. At first I was very scared that I would not finish on time, and I was just lost on how I could write a budget proposal, how I could write a professional artist statement. But yeah, it paid off well because we did a lot of we used a lot of help from different people, and it was pretty good.
Saeed or Sofiane, where should I go?
Yes. As I mentioned quickly, I mean, something which I really appreciated was the fact that, I mean, we came along very well. So, I mean, the four of us, I hope so. But no, I mean, truly. And I mean, for me, something which was quite kind of a challenge that I don't have an art background, like I haven't studied art. So as Majd said, I mean, some of the courses were like pretty new and very constitutive of what I would have what I presented later. So I mean, now I can say it in front of everyone. I felt a bit like out of place at the beginning, but then after, what I really liked is that through all the process, we have so many different components to the training that I felt like that it was growing on me. Yes.
Yeah. I think I'll just follow on from what Sofiane said. I think even in art school, they don't teach you about all of these things. A lot of these things you have to kind of learn, you know, by yourself and through reading. And I think for me, the main challenge, well, first of all, I love the experience, the interaction of so many different, you know, established artists and the way that they structured the program. I think that it matured over the past few years. The one challenge that I was personally facing was that I didn't have a studio space. So I was working from anywhere and everywhere. So if we were to think about what is a studio today, I think this is another hour-long session, Sarah. But in general, for me, I think when you have a space that you go to and you know, produce and make work and think, that is when, you know, the process of materializing a concept becomes at least even ever so slightly easier. But apart from that, I really enjoyed the experience. I didn't have any major challenges.
I think for me, it was because I had just come out of university and delving into this idea of identity. Actually, funny story, when we were doing like the capstone session, like I walked in, I'm like, I'm not gonna be creating anything about myself. I am not thinking about identity. And I was like really like anti-identity. I don't know where that was coming from, but I had done a full body of work about that, even though it wasn't at the forefront of it, like I mentioned. And when we had that theme come up again, for me, I was like, how can I approach it differently? I did not want to continue that body of work. Instead, I wanted to come at it with a different perspective. And I really did push myself. And just shout out to our curator, Nasr Abdullah. He like pushed me like beyond belief. Yeah, so that was my challenge, trying to find a perspective I haven't done yet, and even just working with material that I wasn't comfortable with. Like when I think about it, I was literally putting myself on display, like through the objects that I chose to put in those rocks. So yeah, we have another question. Thank you all for sharing your work and thought process. Majd, I really liked your work. I've been doing linoleum prints, sorry if I butchered that, as well, and can truly relate to the focus shifting to the mold rather than the printed paper. The etched surface is a strong storyteller. I also liked that you used, okay, sorry, that's just a comment. I'm sorry about that. Manufacturer, scratching the surface when you stumble across the gem.
Your voice is too loud. I don't know what
Something happened with the mic.
Is it the exorcist thing?
Yeah, it was the exorcist thing.
Wait, am I okay now?
Yes, you're good.
Guys, sometimes sometimes my laptop does that, and yeah.
It woke us all up. It's good.
Good to know. Great. We have another question. Do you think identity is an overly discussed topic here in the UAE art scene? Wow. Does anyone want to go for that?
I would say that, I mean, on the contrary, it's not discussed enough. It's not discussed enough in its diversity. I mean, authorities are giving us plenty of opportunities, or let's say occasions, just to speak about it. But let's say that people, exactly as you just mentioned before, Sarah, a lot of people, a lot of artists don't want to put themselves, just to show a part of themselves when it comes to identity. And I mean, let's say that identity is something I hope you can't really lie on. I mean, you have to show a part of you. You have to not justify, but to some extent to say why you are that place and why you are showing this message, or sharing this message. So I think that identity as a general thematic might sound or might look like, let's say, abused and over-abused, but I think that it's not really the case if you look in depth.
Can I add?
Fadal.
I think in general, when we talk about any topic, you'd hear about it everywhere. And I think it depends. I think for me, what's interesting about identity is really hearing the perspective of the artist rather than a generic definition of what identity is today. Identity as a palm tree, identity as a date. I think we're beyond that. So when it becomes a little more critical, where you really kind of extract and kind of research it and see it from a different perspective, yet bring it from your own personal either experience or perspective, I think that's when it develops value. Because we always go back to, I think I mentioned this in my talk, we always go back to philosophizing about, existence, about purpose, about why are we even here. And a lot of that has to do with, a lot of that is linked to identity. And even today, when you read books about it, there is no clear definition of it. I mean, what Sarah presented today was very interesting. But there are many versions of it, and it's a variable, ever changing. And that's just my 2 cents on it.
For sure. I think there was a follow-up to that, asking, are we seeing repetitive conversations or no coverage of the different aspects of it? If you could explain just a little, Amna Shahi, what do you mean by different aspects? Yeah. So like for me, at least, like with the idea of identity, I think I agree with Saeed in the sense that we are talking about it, and maybe sometimes we're not talking about it enough, but it is about the different perspectives. But for me, at least, it is about the artist's perspective on it, and it's about what they bring to the table that will add to the conversation. No matter how many conversations are out there, no matter how many different aspects of the same term that we are talking about. And this is another question for Majd. Has something inspired your new exploration in analog film, specifically working with the Bolex camera? Also, where do you see yourself in the future regarding your work or life in general?
Well, I recently got introduced to shooting on 16mm. A good friend of mine introduced me to analog filmmaking, and I'm still kind of like getting my hands around it. We've been doing a lot of work. We've been shooting a lot and trying to like process at home. We actually also built a darkroom. This is basically where I work, and this is where I process the films that I shoot. And it's kind of like a new thing for me that I'm still trying to learn, and I'm still trying to like learn more about it. But for the future, currently I'm trying to get my master's done. So I'm like looking at different colleges, looking at different majors, seeing what I should do in the future. But that's it for now. I'm just trying to do some work, learn a lot about analog filmmaking, and just, yeah, that's it. I would like to finish my master's and see where I take it from there.
Good goals. We have a question for Sofiane. Banu Ghaffari is asking, how do you navigate through avoiding linguistic barriers English has when narrating a non-English culture? And how do you navigate around installing cultural objects sadly fetishized by other cultures?
I might start answering like the second question, and then I'll go back to the first question. So I mean that's a very interesting point just to discuss about fetishization of some objects, or let's say some traditions, let's say of our culture, fetishized by the West. That was the first installation I made, Hammam tomorrow. As I mentioned, my grandmother in Algeria used to own a hammam. And I was very surprised to see that hammam has a different meaning, even in other Arabic, in other like Arabic dialects. But it was like clearly fetishized by Westerners, because I mean, let's say hammam had a completely different, let's say, perception in Europe or in the West. But then I wanted also just to check that even in some part of the, let's say, Muslim world, or like some, let's say, some very conservative Muslims would have be really opposed to the hammam. So it's why I wanted just to reappropriate the idea of the hammam to share it with people. Basically, what I'm trying to do, not just through art, but also through, let's say, the digital platform that I have, is to reanalyze and just really to dig amongst the variety of cultures that the Arab world has, to some extent also, let's say, reorient the perception that we might have. I don't know if when I say reoriented, if it's like clear or not. It's like being myself born in the West, to some extent, sometimes when I'm discovering new traditions, actually it's even the case for a lot of people who were born in the Arab world, because I mean, the youth has been so westernized that to some extent we tend to rediscover through the West part of our cultures. So I'm always trying just to get local sources very often to find that. I don't know if it was clear or not, Banu, if you can tell me. To answer the first question, how do I navigate through avoiding linguistic barriers English has when narrating a non-English culture? I have myself some linguistic barriers with English. Even though I do speak English, I can speak English, I have to like barriers. So I'm very aware of the limitations that some languages can have. And it's why very often, you know, Arabic itself, you know, when I was mentioning the hammam, in the majority of, let's say, Baldan al-Khalij, like countries of the Gulf or Middle East, hammam means toilets. It's why sometimes people need to add like a nationality to the hammam Maghribi, hammam Turkey, hammam. Whereas for us, it's just hammam. Hammam is like the bath, the place where you take. So I do spend a lot of time digging around languages, around words, sorry. And when it comes to English, I think that, let's say the English I might speak, or the English some of us might speak, which is like the airport English, might look as, let's say, poor, but when you dig, English is a very, very, very like rich language. And what I really like also in English is that even though sometimes you might missing getting exactly the full meaning of a word, especially when it comes to Arabic, English brings a sense of, I won't say organization, but it can be very straight to the point. And I like the fact also just to mix both. Yeah.
Um, I actually have a question for us as a group. Me and Saeed were talking about repetition within our works, and the more that I sat on that statement, I found that repetition is quite common in a lot of our works, whether it's through the pattern, like Sofiane, maybe you use, or even the shoes that you had on display, merged with the copper plates, Saeed with the truffles, and me with the rocks. Maybe we can just slightly touch upon repetition within our work, and the meaning of that, if it applies to the work for the exhibition or for your previous pieces as well. Saeed.
Oh, you want me to start?
Saeed, how was
Okay, I think, well, so I studied printmaking, and, we always think about the multiple and, the idea of, multiplicity in general. And I think, at least for the installations that I've shown here, the idea of an object becoming many is to suggest the possibility of a kind of infinity and a comprehensiveness and variation, which I found which basically looks at the, as well as, mass production, and, emphasizing certain ideas about today. I try to always also refer to the environment that I'm in, meaning we value skyscrapers. And so even the idea of, seeing skyscrapers kind of informing my work. And maybe in the larger sense, today we swift through images just like that. Every second we kind of digest a lot of information. So this idea of, trying to navigate all of these complicated notions is part of why I feel like repetition and the many are important in my work.
Sofiane or Majd, would you like to speak about that? And if not, I can go for it.
I'll just go, on my side.
Okay. For me, I feel like repetition is a big part of my work, whether it's creating multiples within like a series, or specifically with this work, I think it reaffirmed my idea of this fossil and the life that object had. And the more that you saw it, the more insight you had to me as well as an individual, as an artist. And so I think repetition in that sense is really important to reaffirm the theme or the concept that I'm going for. And Sofiane, do you want to go, or should we move on to the next question? You're on mute.
Yeah, we can move on, yeah.
Okay, we also have a question for Saeed from Sarah Ahli. She says, I was really interested in your equation for space, place, and the overall subject of place mimicry. Could you kindly touch on the importance of how it manifests in your work?
Good question. I think in general, maybe I'll start with, how I define place mimicry. And for me, it is creating art in the image of a place using materials, forms, habits, and norms that conceptually imitate what there is around about or inside a place, for the purpose of kind of engaging ideas of place in a way that is reflective of the current contemporary landscape. So for example, the last installation, Lull, realizes place mimicry by using forms, the desert truffles, for example, materials and technology, which is 3D printing and its relationship to, the idea of Dubai having the largest 3D printed building, as well as the notion that the 3D printing material will be something that is very common, maybe in the near future. Today it's very expensive. Tomorrow it might be less expensive. And then, it will therefore enter this idea of mass production. And so it is specific to the environment that I'm in, which is why it's place mimicry. And it also engages with this geographical or geographic reality and, the complexities of progress and change. So I think it's interwoven. It's, all of these things all together. And every time I try to kind of dissect it or tackle it from a different way, it kind of materializes or manifests or suggests many different variations. So it plays with that idea of permutations where you take one space, one unit, or one object, and then you repeat it. You create a universe. So this idea of infinity is also kind of woven into that. I think I can talk endlessly about this topic, but maybe in general, I hope I answered your question.
I just want to say thank you so much for giving a definition to place mimicry. It really kind of like built this picture in my mind. I don't know if it's a follow-up question or more of like, actually, yeah, I'm interested in sort of that corner you shared earlier with your art pieces sort of, diverging into that corner. Can you like, I know I might be taking too much time here, but can you maybe kind of like discuss like why that corner? What does it mean to have like, all the artworks just placed in that one corner? Because that was really interesting to me, just kind of the placement and the repetition of it.
I think there are a couple of reasons why I felt like the corner kind of made sense for that installation. It could have been in the middle of that space that was allocated to me for my degree show, but I was given a corner, and I kind of wanted to make the work fit a space and play with what Bachelard wrote about corners being, places of potential refuge and places that, shelter daydreamers. So using the notion that when anyone that talks about corners, cutting corners or using it to kind of create your safe haven, I think the whole idea was that when I installed something either in a corner or even in the middle of a space, that installation itself creates that place of meaning that is relevant to my practice. So it plays with this idea of you take a blueprint, you move it elsewhere, it's a place. So it being a corner possesses a type of immensity that Bachelard wrote about in his book. And I feel like that was my attempt at kind of exploring that idea of corners as borders, as a place of refuge, just to put it in simple terms. But there's a whole section or chapter in his book. It's called The Poetics of Space. And I think that if you're really interested in corners, that's definitely something that you should also read about. All right, awesome.
Thank you so much.
I'm on mute. I think we'll end with one more question and then we'll end the session kind of going off of place mimicry. I've noticed that within our work and what is the importance of place within identity within our works? Like what places did we go to physically or mentally when creating these works? And possibly even the place or space of the exhibition, if that comes into play. If anyone wants to go first. Or I can go. Okay, so like for me, place is really important, and specifically about this work, place was within myself, but also place within the borders of my own home. And even like the sand was part of the sand to create these rocks were from like our backyard, and the objects that I use were within my bedroom, within the living room. And it was important to me to stay within this confined space because I feel like if I were to go beyond that, there would have been too many options, and I wanted to confine it and have a focus, which was bring it back to myself. And the way I displayed it as well, I mentioned the idea of the wonder cabinets and the natural history museum display, and I wanted to create a space between those two ideas, and that is how place is important to my work. Majd or Sofiane or Saeed?
Places are central in the pieces that I've shared with you before. More in the sense of what they do represent, especially to break, let's say, ideas that we can have around like some places, airports, hammam. In the video this time, I wanted just to use the place not as a main actor, because in the previous works that I've done, it was like, let's say, okay, an installation of an airport, an installation of a hammam. This time, it was not about the ice rink as itself, because as you could see, it was. I mean, even though like I chose like the Al Nasser Leisure Club ice rink, which is like very emblematic for Dubai. It was the first ice rink in Dubai. It was more like to show that it was a place where we could move. So it was more just to show the idea of dynamic identities. Saeed?
I guess I'll just be brief then. I spoke a lot about place, but as kind of a final statement. Sorry, I hope it says that my connection's unstable. But for me, place is central to my practice, and it's partly because I'm trying to exhaust the place. So can you actually exhaust the place by through observation or through experience or through analysis? Can you do that? So a lot of it is kind of driven by that process of questioning place. Build a city and people will come. Civilizations, Babylon, when you read about Babylon, you realize that they had so many different types of cultures. Turkey today, Egypt, and even the Far East. So all of these different architecture in one spot in the Middle East or in Arabia, I feel is very interesting. It's very much about place, but really we always speak about place, but in reality, it's very much intertwined with the idea of ability. And well, so I try to keep it simple, but it's exhaust the place by over analyzing it and thinking about it and finding my own place within that place.
All right, thank you. Majd, you're back. If you want to answer the question, I think we'll end the session. If it applies.
So basically what space, like what it meant to me was, I was trying to discuss, how my identity would like change throughout time depending on where I go. But unfortunately for me, I can't really like do much about it because I don't have the power over it. So instead I chose to like send these parts of me outside and just like letting the work happen without doing anything to it. Letting the plates react to like the environment there, the human interaction that they had with each individual. And in the exhibition, like you would start looking at the pieces from left to right. And then at the end of the space, you will see like on the right, you will see like a mirror polished copper sheet that basically shows you reflection in it. And it basically means that, my identity or like the person's identity who's looking at the plate is like at a state of like constant change. And that was about it for me.
Definitely. And I feel like within all our works, there is some idea of change.